My wife called me a broke nobody with a wrench and walked out on me a year later. She begged for forgiveness when that nobody became a millionaire. The neon sign at Marge's Diner flickered like it had been doing since Reagan was in office, casting that familiar reddish glow across Main Street in Rock Creek, Ohio. It was one of those small towns where everybody knew your name, your business, and probably what you had for breakfast. I'm Tom Ridley, 45, and back then my hands were perpetually stained with engine oil that no amount of Dawn dish soap could fully remove. Some folks around there call me the mechanic stuck in the past. Not exactly wrong, I suppose. The clock on my garage wall was pushing 7 p.m. as Johnny Cash growled to my old radio about walking the line. The music took me back to summers with my grandfather, Jim, the man who taught me everything worth knowing about engines and a whole lot more about life. His 1967 Ford Mustang GT500 wasn't just a car. That machine was freedom on wheels. 428 cubic inches of pure American muscle wrapped in Highland green paint that shimmered like a jewel under the Ohio sun. When I was 12, Grandpa Jim would let me ride shotgun on Sunday afternoons. We'd cruise down County Road 17 with the windows down, Springsteen's Born to Run, blasting so loud you could probably hear us from 3 farms over. The wind would whip through the car, and Grandpa would laugh that big belly laugh of his, slapping the steering wheel. I remember everything about that car. The slightly worn leather seats that smelled like Grandpa's aftershave and peppermint gum. The way the engine rumbled at idle, like a caged animal just waiting to be unleashed. The chrome trim that I'd help polish every other weekend until you could see your reflection clear as day. But mostly, I remember how it made me feel. Like anything was possible. Like the road ahead could take you anywhere you wanted to go. A car is a heart that beats if you know how to listen. Grandpa used to tell me while we worked under the hood. He'd tap the engine block with his wrench for emphasis, nodding like he was sharing the secrets of the universe. Most folks nowadays, they don't hear it. They just want something to get from A to B. But you and me, Tommy, we know better. Things changed when the farm started failing in the early 80s. Bad harvests, bank loans piling up, and suddenly that Mustang, Grandpa's pride and joy, became a luxury they couldn't afford. I still remember that gray November afternoon when he sold it to old man O'Connor from the next county over. I was 13, standing in the driveway, trying not to cry as O'Connor handed over the cash and drove my dreams away in a cloud of exhaust. "Life's like a carburetor, Tommy," Grandpa said afterward, his voice rough as he slung his arm around my shoulders. "If you don't get the mixture right, you're going to stall out." He squeezed my shoulder and promised we'd get another one someday. But we never did. Life had a funny way of throwing you curveballs when you least expected them. I started out thinking I'd conquer the world, and then before I knew it, I was 45 years old, fixing plastic boxes on wheels, as I like to call those modern cars, in a rundown garage that smelled like gasoline, old coffee, and faded dreams. My toolbox was older than most of my customers, and I had a collection of vintage road signs on the walls that was worth more than my monthly income. My little house at the edge of town wasn't much, but it was mine. Well, technically, it was the bank's, who kept sending me love letters about mispayments. Pretty sure the folks at First National Bank thought I was starting a collection of their envelopes. The place wasn't fancy, just a small 2-bedroom with peeling paint and a porch that creaked louder than my knees on cold mornings. But it was where I kept the things that mattered. Grandpa's vinyl records, his old tools, the memories. The townspeople around there looked at me with a mix of pity and amusement. The guy who couldn't let go of the past. The one who still listened to records instead of Spotify and drove a '92 Ford pickup when everyone else had moved on to hybrids and crossovers. I fixed their Toyotas and Hondas all day, but my heart belonged to Detroit steel, chrome bumpers, and engines you could actually work on without a computer science degree. "You ever gonna join the 21st century, Tom?" They'd ask me while waiting for oil changes. I'd just smile and tell them I was still enjoying the 20th century reruns. It wasn't always that way. A few years back, I had what people call a normal life. A wife, Kate, who used to laugh at my jokes before they became the same old stories. 2 kids, Jack and Emma, 16 and 14 now, who used to think their dad hung the moon before they realized I was just a guy who couldn't afford the latest iPhone for their birthdays. Kate was a small-town girl with big-city dreams. I was a small-town guy with, well, small-town dreams. For a while, that worked. She taught third grade at Rock Creek Elementary, and I fixed cars. We had cookouts on Sundays and went camping in the summer. But something changed after our high school reunion 5 years ago. Suddenly, my grease-stained hands and endless talk about carburetors weren't charming anymore. They were embarrassing. The argument started small, like a tiny leak in a radiator hose. Hardly noticeable at first, but eventually it blew wide open. "You're living in the past, Tom," she'd say. "There's a whole world out there, and you're stuck in this garage." I try to explain that some people are meant to stay put, that there's honor in keeping things running, in fixing what's broken instead of replacing it. That Rock Creek was home. But Kate had made up her mind. The day she left, taking Jack and Emma with her to Cincinnati where her sister lived, she called me a wrench-wielding failure who can't face reality. Those words stung because they were half right. I couldn't let go of the past, but I never saw that as failure. That was 2 years ago. After that, I'd see the kids every other weekend, when Kate remembered to drop them off. Jack was embarrassed by my garage and my stories. Emma tried harder. Bless her heart, but I could see her checking her phone every 5 minutes when she visited, counting down until she could return to civilization. The funny thing is, I got it. At their age, I couldn't wait to get out of Rock Creek, too. It wasn't until I left for a few years, working at a dealership in Columbus, that I realized what this place meant to me. By then, Grandpa was gone, the farm was sold, and all that remained were memories and that little house I scraped together enough to buy. Life has a way of coming full circle like that. The days blended together in a rhythm of oil changes, brake jobs, and the occasional transmission rebuild. Wake up at 5:30, coffee at Marge's by 6, garage open by 7, work until the light faded or the jobs ran out. Some nights I sat on my porch with a beer, watching the fireflies and wondering if there was a fork in the road I missed somewhere. But I wasn't complaining. There was satisfaction in fixing things, in sending someone back on the road with confidence. I might not have been changing the world, but I was keeping a small corner of it running smoothly. Grandpa would have understood that. It was a Wednesday evening in late August when everything changed. The garage was quiet except for the lazy spin of the ceiling fan and Merle Haggard on the radio. My buddy Bob dropped by with a six-pack and a bag of those off-brand chips he was always munching on. Bob worked at the hardware store and knew everyone's business, which made him Rock Creek's unofficial news channel. He was halfway through a second beer when he casually dropped the bombshell that would change everything. "Heard Old Man O'Connor pass last week," he said, crunching chips between words. "Heart attack out in the field. Found him next to his tractor." I nodded solemnly. O'Connor was pushing 90, so it wasn't exactly shocking news, but still another piece of the old Rock Creek gone. "His grandson's coming down from Chicago to clear out the place," Bob continued. "Some hotshot lawyer type who's never changed his own oil. Gonna sell the farm, equipment, everything. Guy just wanted it all gone quick." I took a swig of beer, letting the information settle. O'Connor's farm, the place where Grandpa's Mustang disappeared all those years ago. "Funny thing," Bob said, wiping crumbs from his shirt. "I was over there helping Mabel from church drop off a casserole for the family, and I swear I saw something under a tarp in that back barn. Something car-shaped. Could be that old Mustang your grandpa sold him. Remember that?" My heart stuttered like a flooded engine. "Probably just a pile of rust by now," I said, trying to sound casual while my mind raced a million miles an hour. O'Connor was exactly known for maintaining his equipment. Bob shrugged. "Maybe, but that grandson's looking to unload everything. Said anything in the barns goes with the property unless someone makes him an offer." After Bob left, I couldn't focus on anything. The radio played on, but I didn't hear it. My hands went through the motions of cleaning tools, but my mind was 35 years in the past, riding shotgun in that Highland Green Mustang. It couldn't be the same car. Even if it was, it'd be ruined by now. And even if it wasn't completely ruined, I couldn't afford it. And even if I somehow could afford it, what would I do with it? I had enough problems without adding a restoration project I couldn't afford. But at 1 a.m., I found myself in my pickup, driving the back roads to O'Connor's farm, a flashlight on the seat beside me. This was crazy. This was trespassing. This was probably going to end with me getting arrested or shot by some trigger-happy farmhand. But I couldn't stop myself. Some things pull at you with a gravity you can't explain. The far was dark and quiet when I pulled up. No security lights, no dogs barking, just crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. I parked a quarter-mile down the road and walked the rest of the way, my flashlight beam bobbing through the darkness. The main barn door was secure with a rusty padlock, but the side door hung open, creaking slightly in the night breeze. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of old hay and machine oil. My flashlight beam caught on tarps covering bulky shapes. Farm equipment, mostly, an old tractor, assorted implements. And in the far corner, something lower to ground, covered in a faded blue tarp that was gray with decades of dust. My heart pounded as I approached it, feeling like a kid sneaking downstairs before Christmas morning. Slowly, I lifted one corner of the tarp, revealing a glimpse of metal beneath. Not the Highland green, the first remembered, but a patch of rust-mottled steel. I pulled the tarp further back, revealing more. A fender, a headlight housing, the distinctive shape of a Mustang's front end, unmistakable even under layers of dust and neglect. This couldn't be happening. I convinced myself it was gone forever, sold for scrap or rotting in some junkyard. But there it was, forgotten in a barn like a time capsule. I circled the car slowly, lifting sections of the tarp as I went. The once proud Mustang was in rough shape. The paint was faded and blistered, with rust blooming across the body like a rash. The tires were flat, the chrome pitted. The interior, what I could see of it through grimy windows, was cracked and worn, but it was all there, a complete 1967 Shelby GT500. Even in that condition, it was worth a small fortune to the right buyer. To me, it was worth everything. I was about to cover it back up when my flashlight caught something on the rear bumper. A faded sticker, barely legible after all those years. Route 66 with a stylized road sign graphic. My hand trembled as I touched it. I remember the day Grandpa put that sticker on. We were at a gas station somewhere in Illinois on our way back from a car show in Chicago. I was 10 years old, and he let me help position it just right. "Always remember, Tommy," he'd said, "the real joy isn't in the destination. It's in the journey and who you share it with." I sank to my knees on the dusty barn floor, the flashlight beam shaking in my trembling hand. "Grandpa," I whispered into the darkness, "did you come back to me?" I didn't believe in signs or fate or any of that mystical stuff. Life had made me too practical, too worn down for fairy tales. But standing there in that musty barn, looking at the ghosts of my childhood dreams, I couldn't help feeling that some things were meant to happen. This car, this exact car with my grandfather's sticker still clinging to its bumper after all those years, it couldn't be a coincidence. It was like the universe was throwing me a lifeline, a second chance at something I thought was lost forever. If this wasn't Grandpa's car, then I was officially losing my mind. As I covered the Mustang back up, carefully arranging the tarp exactly as I found it, I knew what I had to do. It was insane. It was financially reckless. It was probably impossible. But I was going to find a way to bring that car home. Tomorrow, I'd figure out who to talk to, how much they wanted, where I'd get the money. That night, though, I drove home with the windows down, Johnny Cash on the radio. And for the first time in years, the future looked like something more than just another day at the garage. Sometimes life throws you curveballs. And sometimes, just sometimes, it throws you a perfect pitch right across the plate. "I'm coming for you," I whispered to the memory of that Highland green Mustang. "Just hold on a little longer." That old Ford pickup had been with me for 13 years. Hauled lumber for the back porch, carried Jack to his first fishing trip at Willow Creek, took Emma to dance recitals in her tutu and sparkly shoes. When I signed over the title to Denny Williams from the next county, my hand shook like I was signing away a family member. But you can't build a new dream without letting go of something. The truck brought exactly what I needed. Just enough cash to make an offer O'Connor's grandson couldn't refuse for that piece of junk taking up space in the barn. The city boy hadn't even bothered to look under the tarp. To him, it was just another dusty burden to clear out before putting the farm on the market. To me, it was everything. Moving that Mustang was like trying to transport a sleeping bear. Bob helped me with his cousin's flatbed. The whole time he kept shaking his head, mumbling about how I'd officially lost my mind. Maybe he was right. Sane people didn't empty their savings for a rusted shell that hadn't moved in 3 decades. When we finally got into my garage, with every neighbor on the block watching from their porches like it was a parade, I stood back and really looked at what I'd done. The Mustang was worse in daylight. A sad, decayed version of the beast I remembered. Rust had eaten through the floorboards in places. The once powerful 428 engine was seized up tight as a drum. The leather seats had cracked and split like old snakeskin. The paint wasn't even Highland green anymore, just patches of color between blisters of rust. I was crazy. Completely, utterly crazy. But it was Grandpa Jim's car. I was sure of it. The Route 66 sticker was just the start. When I checked the VIN against the paperwork I'd found in Mom's attic years ago, it matched. This was the same GT500 that O'Connor had driven away that November day in 1983. The car that gave me my first taste of what freedom felt like. The one Grandpa had sold to keep the farm going another year, before the bank took it anyway. If I needed any more proof, I found it when I pulled off what was left of the driver's seat, carved in tiny letters on the metal frame underneath. JR plus MR 1968. Jim Ridley and Margaret Ridley. My grandparents, marking their treasure like lovesick kids. That first night, I sat on an overturned bucket in the garage until 3 a.m., just staring at the car. The single bulb overhead hummed and flickered, throwing shadows across the Mustang's broken body. I had Johnny Cash's Folsom Prison Blues playing on my old turntable, the vinyl crackling like it was frying in a pan. Grandpa's favorite. It felt like having a ghost in my garage, a piece of the past that had somehow found its way back to me when I needed it most. Every bolt tells a story, Tom. Grandpa used to say when we'd work on engines together, you just got to know how to listen. I wondered what stories this old car could tell after all these years. Where it had been, what it had seen, how it ended up forgotten in a barn instead of crushed for scrap. The next morning, I made a list of everything I needed to fix. It was so long I had to use both sides of the paper. The engine would need to be completely rebuilt. The transmission, too. New wire and harness. New brake lines. New fuel lines. New. Everything, basically. And that was assuming the frame wasn't too far gone to save. The parts for a 67 Shelby GT500 weren't exactly sitting on shelves at the local AutoZone. They were rare as hen's teeth, and priced like they were made of gold. A correct carburetor alone would cost more than I made in a month. The specialized Shelby parts would be even worse. I started with what I could afford. Spent that whole first weekend just taking the car apart, cataloging every piece, whether I thought it could be saved or not. Took hundreds of photos from every angle, so I'd remember how it all went together. Set up a corner of the garage with shelves and bins, each labeled with masking tape. Engine bay, salvageable. Interior, trash, chrome, possibly restorable. By Sunday night, the Mustang was more of a jigsaw puzzle than a car, and my hands were covered in cuts and rust stains that no amount of scrubbing could remove. But for the first time in years, I felt alive. Word got around Rock Creek fast. In a town that size, a man selling his truck to buy a rusted Mustang was big news. Most folks thought I'd finally cracked under the pressure of the divorce. Others figured I was having some kind of midlife crisis. Either way, I became the latest local joke. Hey, Tom, you building a time machine or just a monument to stupidity? Jerry from a hardware store would ask when I came in for supplies. Little of both. I'd answer with a smile that hid the doubt that kept me up at night. The bank notices came like clockwork. My mortgage was already behind before I emptied my account for the Mustang. Now, with the truck gone and more money going into parts than coming in from repair jobs, I was sinking fast. I started taking on extra work, fixing lawnmowers, chainsaws, anything with an engine that someone would pay me to look at. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. I'd work at the garage from 7 to 6, grab dinner, usually a sandwich eaten while standing, then head home to work on the Mustang until my eyes wouldn't stay open anymore. I'd fall asleep on the old couch I dragged into the garage, wake up at dawn, and do it all over again. My dad says you're wasting your time on that heap of junk, Jack told me one Friday when Kate dropped the kids off. He tried to sound tough, but I could see he was embarrassed. 16 years old and desperate to fit in, the last thing he needed was a father who became the town weirdo. Emma, always my defender, punched in the arm and told him to shut up. Dad knows what he's doing, she said with more confidence than I felt. I took them for burgers at the diner, pretending not to notice when Jack hunched down in his seat as his friends walked by outside. Later, when Emma asked to see the car, Jack stayed in the house, suddenly very interested in a basketball game between teams he didn't even follow. Miss Perkins, my old English teacher who still lived across the street, brought me casseroles sometimes, said I was getting too skinny. At 73, she'd been ancient when she taught me Shakespeare in high school, but somehow hadn't aged a day since. Her '89 Buick had started making a knocking noise, and I spent a Sunday afternoon fixing it instead of working on the Mustang. "How much do I owe you, Tom?" she'd ask when the Buick purred like new. "Your smile reminds me of my grandfather's." I told her. "That's payment enough." She'd laughed at that, the skin around her eyes crinkling like tissue paper. Your grandfather must have been quite the handsome fellow then. The nights were the hardest. When the tools were put away and the garage went quiet except for the buzzing of that overhead light, doubts would creep in like mice through the cracks. What was I doing? Did I really think I could bring this car back from the dead? And even if I could, what then? It wouldn't bring Grandpa back. It wouldn't fix my marriage. It wouldn't make Jack respect me again. Life's like an engine rebuild, Tommy. Grandpa used to say, you gotta tear it all down before you can build it back up better. I wonder if I'd torn my life down too far to ever rebuild it. The parts problem got worse. I scoured every junkyard within 100 miles, spent hours on online forums, asking about alternatives, workarounds, reproduction parts that wouldn't bankrupt me. But some things couldn't be substituted. A Shelby was a Shelby. My checking account dwindled to double digits. I sold my TV, then my microwave, then Grandpa's old ham radio that I'd promised myself I'd never part with. Each sale felt like cutting off a finger, but the Mustang needed to eat. My wallet got so thin you could read a newspaper through it. Thinner than my ex-wife's patience. I joked to anyone who'd listen. One Thursday night, after a particularly rough day when the garage had been empty of customers and the mail had brought another bank notice, I sat on the floor beside the Mustang's gutted shell. I was tired, bone tired, the kind of tired that seeps into your soul. What am I doing, Grandpa? I whispered to the empty garage. Tell me I'm not crazy. That's when I spotted something sticking out from under the remains of the glove box I'd been meaning to remove, a corner of yellowed paper. I reached in, careful not to tear it, and pulled out a photograph I hadn't seen in decades. It was Grandpa standing beside the Mustang at the Harvest Fair, 1972. His arm was around Grandma, her hair in that perfect bouffant she always wore. The car gleamed in the sunlight, those racing stripes cutting across the hood like lightning bolts. And though the photo had faded with age, you could still make out Grandpa's proud smile. The same one I'd seen in the mirror all those years working beside him. I turned the photo over. In Grandpa's neat handwriting, "Tommy, chase your dreams. They run faster than any car." I sat there holding that picture until the overhead light flickered and died, leaving me in darkness except for the moonlight coming through the garage window. Something broke inside me that night. Or maybe it was something coming back together. The next morning, I drove to Parker's Pawn on the edge of town and sold my prized possession. The 1940s Philco radio Grandpa had restored and given me for my 18th birthday. "This stays in the family, Tommy," he'd said when he presented it to me. "Some things are worth keeping." Art Parker gave me $600 for it. Probably a quarter of what it was worth, but enough to buy the carburetor I needed. When I handed over that radio, it felt like I was selling a piece of my soul. But sometimes you have to let go of the past to honor it. The town gossip shifted from amusement to concern. Tom Ridley's lost his mind over that car. They'd say in the diner, selling everything he owns. Gonna end up living in that garage. They weren't far wrong. The bank's patience was running out faster than my time to make payments. Miss Perkins brought me the classified one morning, helpfully circled apartments for rent just in case. Even Bob, who'd helped me haul the Mustang home, started avoiding me, like failure might be contagious. Jack stopped coming by altogether. Kate called to tell me he was going through a phase and needed space. Translation, he was too embarrassed by his crazy father to be seen with him. Emma still visited, sitting on that old couch, doing homework while I worked. Sometimes she'd hand me tools or help hold a light where I needed it. She never complained, never asked why I was doing this when we could barely afford groceries. "Dad," she asked one evening, "was Grandpa Jim as stubborn as you?" I laughed until my sides hurt. It was during the darkest part of winter, when the days were short and the garage colder than a meat locker, that I hit rock bottom. The heating bill went unpaid, so I could buy gasket material. I worked wearing 2 pairs of socks and fingerless gloves, my breath foggy in the air like I was smoking Grandpa's old pipe. The frame had more rot than I'd initially thought. The rear quarter panels were Swiss cheese, and the engine, which I'd finally managed to pull and disassemble, needed machine work I couldn't do myself. I was drowning in rust and reality. If you can't change the world, change the engine. Grandpa used to say whenever life threw him curveballs. It was his way of telling me to focus on what I could control. But this engine needed more than I had to give. That night, staring at the photograph of Grandpa with the Mustang, I heard his voice as clearly as if he were standing beside me. "Chase your dreams, Tommy boy." I folded the photo carefully and put it in my wallet, right where I'd see it every time I opened it to find nothing inside. A reminder of why I started this madness in the first place. The next morning, I made coffee so strong it could have stripped paint and sat down with a notepad. If I was going to sink this ship, I'd go down fighting. I made a new list, not of parts one needed, but what I could sell, what jobs I could take on, what corners I could cut without compromising the integrity of the build. I wasn't giving up, not on Grandpa's car, not on the promise I'd made to myself standing in that barn with a flashlight. "I won't let you down, Grandpa," I whispered to the photo. "We're going to make this old heart beat again." The road ahead was long, the obstacles many, but for the first time in months, I had something more powerful than doubt fueling me. I had purpose, and sometimes that's enough to keep the engine running. A year can change everything. Seasons turn, people grow, life happens, and sometimes a pile of rust gradually transforms into something resembling an actual car. 12 months after hauling Grandpa's Mustang into my garage, it wasn't exactly ready for a magazine cover, but it wasn't a tetanus risk anymore either. The body shell sat on jack stands, stripped to bare metal in places, patched in others. The frame had been reinforced where rust had eaten through. New floorboards gleamed like silver islands in a sea of primer gray. My living situation had taken a similar course of demolition and rebuilding. The bank finally lost patience around month 8 of my restoration odyssey. The foreclosure notice came on a Tuesday. By Friday, I had moved the essentials into garage, a cot, a hot plate, a mini fridge that hummed like it was working twice as hard as it should. My clothes hung from a pipe along the back wall. My bathroom was a sink where I washed parts and a portable toilet I'd bought from a camping supply store. Home sweet home. My kingdom measured 26 by 24 feet, smelled like grease and metal shavings, and came with the constant company of an unfinished Mustang. The garage became my entire world. I slept under the chassis, ate beside the workbench, and showered at the YMCA 3 miles down the road. The garage door opened every morning at 7 sharp for my repair business, closed at 6, then reopened at 7 for the night shift on the Mustang. Some folks in town called it sad. Others called it dedicated. Miss Perkins called it the most stubborn thing she'd seen since her late husband tried to teach their cat to fetch. Whatever it was, it kept me going. The bank took my house, but they can't take my dream, I'd tell customers who asked about my new living arrangements. Most just shook their heads in that pitying way people reserve for the terminally delusional. Living in the garage had one unexpected benefit. No distractions. No TV to waste time on. No lawn to mow. No leaky faucets demanding attention. Just me, the Mustang, and the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. Progress happened in small increments. A polished piece of trim here. A clean fuel line there. Rust converter. And sheet metal work everywhere in between. Money remained the biggest obstacle. Each paycheck from regular repairs disappeared into the Mustang, like I was feeding a slot machine. I started taking side jobs on Sundays, the only day my garage was supposed to be closed. Word got around that if your lawnmower wouldn't start or your chainsaw was acting up, Tom Ridley would fix it for cash on the Lord's Day. The local pastor even brought his riding mower by one Sunday afternoon. When I joked about working on the Sabbath, he just winked and said, "The good Lord appreciates a man who honors his grandfather." It was at the monthly auto swap meet in Fairfield that my luck finally changed. I'd been going religiously, scrounging for affordable parts, usually coming home with makeshift alternatives that required creative engineering to fit. But that muggy July morning, I spotted an older man sitting behind a table loaded with dusty Mustang parts. Not reproduction stuff. Original Ford and Shelby components that looked like they'd been stored in a time capsule. His name was Charlie, and the Freedom Ain't Free tattoo peeking out from under his sleeve told a story before he ever opened his mouth. Vietnam, 1969 to 1971. The faded denim jacket he wore had probably been with him just as long, its color washed out like a favorite memory, revisited too often. Charlie smelled like cigarettes and motor oil, a combination that reminded me of my grandfather's garage on Saturday mornings. His face was weathered like an old baseball glove, with deep creases around eyes that seemed more than they wanted to. But those eyes lit up when I started asking about his parts. We got to talking. Turned out he'd owned a restoration shop specializing in classic Fords before arthritis claimed his hands. These parts were the last of his inventory, kept more for sentimental reasons than anything else. When I told him about Grandpa's Mustang, something shifted in his expression. By the end of our conversation, I was loading boxes of priceless Shelby GT500 components into my truck, original carburetors, gauge clusters, wiring harnesses, even the special Shelby intake manifold. When I asked what all this would cost me, Charlie named a figure, so low I thought I'd misheard him. "Why are you practically giving these away?" I asked, suspicion mixing with gratitude. Charlie took a long look at my oil-stained hands, the dark circles under my eyes, the worn-out boots that had been resoled twice. He told me I reminded him of himself 30 years ago. Said some people chase money their whole lives, while others chase dreams, and he'd always respected the dream chasers more. Then he tapped the side of his head and told me the most valuable parts weren't in those boxes. They were the knowledge of how to use them properly. For the next 3 hours, Charlie walked me through the correct assembly procedures for a GT500 engine, the tricks Ford never put in the manuals, the shortcuts and pitfalls he discovered over decades of restoration work. It was like having a masterclass from Shelby himself. As I was leaving, Charlie pressed a business card into my hand with his phone number, told me to call if I got stuck, day or night. Some men went fishing in retirement, he said. He preferred helping the next generation keep the classics alive. Driving home with a truck full of parts that would have cost me a year's salary at market prices, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Luck. Maybe the universe wasn't conspiring against me after all. Maybe Grandpa was pulling some strings from the great beyond. Either way, for the first time since starting this crazy project, finishing it actually seemed possible. Summer faded into fall, and the Mustang continued its metamorphosis from rust bucket to restoration. With Charlie's parts and ongoing phone consultations, the powertrain came together faster than I'd expected. The 428 cubic inch V8 that had been a seized-up paperweight was now a meticulously rebuilt powerhouse, ready to produce the 355 horsepower that had made the GT500 legendary. My regular customers got used to seeing me emerge from under the Mustang when they dropped off their Hondas and Toyotas for oil changes. My clothes were perpetually stained with grease, my fingernails permanently blackened. I'd lost 20 pounds without trying, living on coffee and whatever Miss Perkins brought over in her endless supply of Tupperware containers. The locals had stopped laughing about Tom's folly and started asking genuine questions about the progress. Something about seeing a man pour his entire life into a dream makes even the cynical curious. One rainy Tuesday, I caught a skinny kid trying to steal tools from the back of my garage. Instead of calling the police, I grabbed him by the collar and sat him down on my work stool. His name was Sam, 13 years old, living with a foster family 2 blocks over. The tools were for a bike he was trying to fix, he said, though his eyes darted around too much for me to believe him. I should have been angry, but something about this scrawny kid with dirt on his face and 2 big clothes reminded me of myself at that age. So instead of punishment, I offered him a deal. He could use my tools under supervision if he helped me clean up the garage for a few hours each week. The next day, Sam showed up right after school, hanging around the garage entrance until I waved him in. He didn't say much, just watched with careful eyes as I worked on reassembling the Mustang's front suspension. Eventually, he started handing me tools before I asked for them, paying attention to which wrench or socket I needed next. By the end of the week, he was my unofficial apprentice, soaking up information about engines like a sponge. I taught him how to gap spark plugs, the difference between a flat and cross-plane crankshaft, why torque specifications mattered. All the things Grandpa had taught me when I was around Sam's age. Grandpa always said knowledge was the one thing you could give away without losing any yourself. So I gave freely to Sam, watching him transform from a would-be thief into a genuinely curious kid with oil-stained hands and a growing vocabulary of automotive terms. Kate wasn't thrilled when she found out I was living in the garage, called it another example of poor judgment, and used it as an excuse to make my weekend visits with the kids even more sporadic. Jack seemed relieved to have a reason not to come, but Emma still showed up most Saturdays, bringing homework and sitting on my cot while I worked. The situation with Jack hurt more than I let on. 17 is a tough age, too old to impress with dad jokes, too young to see beyond peer pressure and appearances. To him, I wasn't just embarrassing anymore. I was cautionary tale material. The hometown failure who lost his house chasing a rusted dream. Emma was different. At 15, she had that distinctive teenage eye roll perfected, but there was still something soft underneath. She never complained about the garage, the lack of a proper bathroom, or the constant smell of grease and metal. Instead, she'd bring her sketch pad and draw while asking questions about the car and Grandpa Jim. "Did you know your crazy father is living in his garage like some kind of mechanical hermit?" Kate had asked the kids, according to Emma. "Sleeping next to that rusty old car like it's more important than having a roof over his head?" In some ways, Kate wasn't wrong. The Mustang had become more than a car to me. It was a connection to my grandfather, a challenge to overcome, a middle finger to everyone who said I'd fail. It was the last thing I thought about before falling asleep, and the first thing I saw when opening my eyes each morning. Some might call that obsession. I called it commitment. The line between the two is thinner than most people think. Winter in Ohio is no joke, especially when you're living in a garage with heating that consisted mainly of a space heater and sheer stubbornness. I rigged up plastic sheeting around my cot area to create a smaller space to heat, wore layers of clothes to bed, kept the coffee pot running almost constantly, as much for warmth as for caffeine. The cold had one advantage. It slowed down the rust that seemed determined to reclaim every metal surface the moment my back was turned. But it also made everything harder. My fingers were perpetually numb. WD, 40 cans had to be warmed before they'd spray properly. Battery performance dropped like a stone. Sam still came by after school most days, now bundled up like an Arctic explorer. He'd bring hot chocolate in a thermos sometimes, claiming his foster mom made too much, though I suspected it was his way of making sure I didn't freeze solid. By January, the engine was completely rebuilt, balanced, and ready for installation. Charlie had talked me through the critical adjustments over the phone, his knowledge making up for my lack of specialized tools. The transmission had been rebuilt by a specialist in Columbus, the one component I couldn't handle myself. The wiring harness was new, the fuel system completely replaced. Sam helped me lower the massive V8 back into the engine bay one Saturday morning. The two of us working the engine hoist with the precision of surgeons. When the motor mounts lined up perfectly on the first try, he high-fived me with such enthusiasm that he nearly fell over. "Mr. Tom," he'd said afterward, "you're way cooler than Tony Stark." From a 13-year-old boy in 2025, there was no higher compliment. The next few weeks were a blur of connections, adjustments, and systems integration. Connecting the transmission to the engine, installing the drive shaft, hooking up the cooling system, running new brake lines. Each step bringing the Mustang closer to being a functional vehicle rather than an expensive lawn ornament. My regular business suffered somewhat. Customers would find me distracted, checking my watch, eager to get back to the restoration. Some took their oil changes and tune-ups elsewhere. But the core group, the ones who've been coming to me for years, they stayed, sometimes hanging around longer than necessary just to check on the Mustang's progress. Even Bob started stopping by again, bringing beers and unsolicited advice. The town's attitude was shifting from mockery to a cautious respect, like they were witnessing either a miracle or a spectacular crash in slow motion, and either way, they didn't want to miss it. The day finally came in early March. The Mustang sat complete in the center of my garage, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Not in showroom condition. There was still body work to be done, upholstery to finish, paint to apply, but it was mechanically complete. Every nut and bolt tightened to specification. Every fluid filled to the proper level. Every wire connected to its designated terminal. It was time for the moment of truth. I'd planned to do this alone, a private culmination of a year's worth of sacrifice and struggle. But word got out, as it always does in small towns. By the time I was ready to turn the key, there was a small crowd gathered outside the open garage door. Miss Perkins, Bob and his wife, a few regular customers. Sam front and center, practically vibrating with excitement, a half-empty glass of lemonade clutched in his hand. The Mustang's original keys had long since disappeared, but I'd installed a new ignition cylinder that matched the door locks. The replacement key felt strange in my hand. Too new, too shiny against the weathered dashboard, but it slid into the ignition with a satisfying click. Grandpa used to say an engine roars loudest when someone believes in it. I told the crowd, my voice steady and I felt. This engine has weathered 40 years of neglect, but it's about to wake up because someone remembered it existed. My heart hammered against my ribs as I turned the key to the accessory position. The gauges sprang to life, needles dancing across their faces as they tested their full range of motion. So far, so good. I pressed the clutch to the floor with my left foot, tapped the gas pedal twice with my right, a habit Grandpa had instilled in me, though the electronic fuel injection made it unnecessary. Said a silent prayer to whatever automotive deities might be listening. Then I turned the key. The starter motor engaged with a high-pitched whine, cranking the massive V8 through its compression strokes. 1 revolution. 2. 3. The engine caught, coughed, then died. The crowd's collective inhale was audible even over the sound of the starter. I tried again. This time the engine fired, sputtered, and caught with a sound like distant thunder. Black smoke coughed from the exhaust pipes, then cleared as the engine settled into a lumpy idle. The entire car vibrated with barely contained power, the hood quivering slightly with each combustion cycle. The 428 cubic inch V8 roared to life, shaking the garage with its primal growl. It wasn't smooth yet. It would need tuning, adjustments, time to break in properly. But it was alive. After decades of silence, Grandpa's Mustang was breathing again. Sam shouted in surprise, lemonade splashing over the rim of his glass, and onto his sneakers. Miss Perkins clapped her hands in delight. Bob let out a whistle that could have signaled trains. Even a few neighbors who'd called my project a waste of time were nodding in reluctant approval. I gently pressed the accelerator, and the engine responded instantly, its rumble deepening into a snarl that vibrated to the concrete floor and up into my bones. The sound wasn't just mechanical, it was visceral, emotional, a voice in the past speaking in the present. That's not rust. I shouted over the engine's roar, echoing something Grandpa used to say. That's rock and roll. The crowd clapped and cheered, perhaps as much for my perseverance as for the car itself. In that moment, the year of poverty, discomfort, and ridicule seemed worth it. The engine I'd rebuilt with my own hands was running. The heart of the Mustang was beating again. I let the engine idle for about 5 minutes, watching the gauges, listening for anything abnormal, my mechanic senses on high alert. But everything looked good. Oil pressure steady. Temperature climbing gradually to normal operating range. No strange knocks or ticks coming from the valve train. After shutting it down to make a few adjustments, I restarted it twice more, each time smoother than the last. The crowd thinned eventually, drifting away with congratulatory nods and pats on the back. But Sam stayed, his face still lit up like it was Christmas morning. "How does it feel, Mr. Tom?" he asked when we were finally alone in the garage, the engine cooling with occasional pings and ticks. I didn't have words adequate to explain it. How do you describe climbing a mountain to someone who's never left the flatlands? How do you explain colors to someone who's only seen in black and white? It feels like halfway home, I finally told him. Later that night, long after Sam had gone home and the street had quieted, I sat on my cot staring at the Mustang. The moonlight streaming to the garage windows cast silver highlights across its unfinished body. It was still rough, still far from complete. The body needed extensive work. The interior was mostly missing. The brakes needed bleeding. The transmission oil needed changing after its initial run. But the hardest part was over. The engine, the heart of any car, was alive again. I thought about what Charlie had said at the swap meet about dream chasers, about what Grandpa had written on that old photograph. Chase your dreams. They run faster than any car. For the first time in ages, I felt like I was catching up to mine. Standing beside the Mustang, running my hand along its fender, I whispered words meant only for absent ears. "We're halfway there, Grandpa. Halfway home." In the quiet garage, with just the ticking of the cooling engine for company, I could almost hear his reply. 2 months after that magical moment when the Mustang first roared to life, I found myself standing in the middle of auto paradise, feeling like I belonged there for the first time in my life. Detroit in May hummed like a finely tuned V8 engine. The streets buzzed with automotive energy. Everywhere you looked, chrome gleamed under perfect spring sunshine, reflecting a kaleidoscope of colors from show car paint jobs that cost more than my annual income. The air carried a mixture of engine fumes, hot dog carts, and popcorn vendors, the kind of uniquely American blend that somehow made sense in Motor City. My Mustang stood there, complete and gleaming in Highland green paint that looked better than it had when Grandpa first drove it off the dealer lot in 1967. Those final 2 months had been a blur of 18-hour days, painstaking detail work, and a determination that surprised even me. The original GT500 racing stripes cut across the hood like lightning bolts. The chrome bumpers caught the light like mirrors, and every piece of trim had been restored to showroom perfection. I'd entered the classic American muscle category after Charlie convinced me the car was ready. Standing here surrounded by other stunning restorations, I realized he'd been right. My Mustang didn't just compete, it commanded attention. The engine bay was spotless, every component restored or replaced with period-correct parts. The interior feature recovered original seats that looked like they came straight from Ford's factory. Even the original AM/FM radio had been restored to working condition, tuned to receive whatever classic rock stations I could find in Motor City. My hand shook slightly as I adjusted the tie Emma had picked out for me, the only one I owned, older than both my kids put together. Its wide polyester pattern screamed 1975 louder than my Mustang Scream performance. I'd spent the morning doing final detailing, ensuring every surface was perfect, though honestly there wasn't much left to do. The other exhibitors had crews, teams of mechanics in matching shirts, clipboard-wielding assistants who knew the documentation better than Wall Street brokers knew their stocks. I had Sam, who'd beg his foster mom to let him come along for the weekend. The kid bounced around like a pinball, taking pictures with a disposable camera, completely unimpressed by the fancy restorations because he'd watched our car come together from rust to glory. "Mr. Tom," he kept saying, "your car's going to win everything. Character. So, perfect restoration. The Mustang had it all. I just had to believe it could compete with cars that cost as much as small houses. The morning passed in a blur of nervous energy and admirers. People wander by, pausing to examine the authentic GT500 badges, taking photos with the perfectly restored bodywork. I overheard comment about incredible attention to detail and exactly what a GT500 should look like. Car enthusiasts asked smart questions about specific components, original parts versus reproductions, matching numbers documentation. Around noon, as I was explaining the engine rebuild specifications to a group of classic car collectors, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. Someone familiar navigating through the crowd. Someone who shouldn't be here, couldn't be here, not without permission that wouldn't have been granted. Jack. My son stood about 30 feet away, looking as surprised to see me as I was to see him. 17 years old, wearing a Metallica t-shirt I'd never seen before, his hair deliberately messy in that way teenagers perfect despite parents paying good money for haircuts. His eyes met mine across the crowd, and suddenly all the noise, all the activity, all the competing cars faded into background static. Kate would kill him for leaving Cincinnati, without permission, would probably blame me somehow. But there he was, and despite everything, the emotional distance, the embarrassment of his homeless father, the complications of divorce and restoration, something had driven him to make the 4-hour drive to Detroit. He made his way over slowly, hands shoved deep in his pockets, probably second-guessing his decision with every step. "Dad," he said when he finally reached the display area, "Mom doesn't know I'm here." The understatement of the century, right there. We didn't have time for a full father-son reconciliation. The judges were making their rounds, clipboards in hand, asking specific questions about build details, documentation, historical authenticity. I answered as best I could while trying to process Jack's presence, explaining original part numbers, showing the factory build sheet, pointing out period-correct modifications. Turns out Charlie had called him. The old Vietnam vet had watched my struggle all year, seen how the project consumed me, noticed a sadness when I'd mentioned my kids. So he'd taken upon himself to track down Jack's number and give him the show details. Sometimes adults do things that surprise you, even when you think you've seen everything. "You want to stand with me while they finish the evaluation?" I asked Jack when the judges moved closer. "You don't have to say anything, just be here." Something shifted in Jack's expression. Not quite pride, not quite embarrassment. Maybe a bit of both. But he nodded and stood beside me as the 3 judges examined the final details. The lead judge, a man who'd probably been judging classic car shows since before Jack was born, asked about the documentation process and any challenges during the restoration. I explained how I'd kept meticulous records, photographed every stage, maintained authenticity while ensuring reliability. I talked about sourcing original parts, working with specialists for machine shop operations, the countless hours of research to ensure period-correct assembly. Jack stayed quiet but present, occasionally nodding when the judges glanced his way. At one point, when they asked about the Shelby-specific components, he pointed out the correct throttle linkage setup, something he must have absorbed during those garage sessions when he thought he wasn't paying attention. When the judges finished their examination, they thanked us and moved on to the next vehicle. The lead judge paused to compliment the attention to detail and the obvious passion behind the restoration. High praise from a man who'd seen thousands of classic cars. That moment of acknowledgement meant more than any trophy could. The award ceremony took place in the main exhibition hall at 5 p.m. Hundreds of people crowded around the temporary stage where show officials would announce winners in various categories. I'd already decided we'd head home after the ceremony regardless of results. Win or lose, this had been worth it. Jack sitting beside me, both of us sharing nervous energy and quiet pride, was victory enough. When they announced the Classic American Muscle category, my stomach did flips like a carnival ride. Third place went to an immaculate 70 Chevelle, completely documented restoration, with matching numbers and factory-correct everything. Second place to a 69 Camaro Z/28 that looked like it had rolled directly off the showroom floor in 1969. First place, the announcer said, went to a restoration that combined historical accuracy with mechanical excellence and emotional authenticity. a car that honored American automotive heritage while inspiring a new generation of enthusiasts. They called my name, Tom Ridley, 1967 Shelby GT500. Walking up to accept the trophy felt surreal. My legs functioned on autopilot while my brain tried to process what was happening. This couldn't be right. There had to be some mistake. But there was a trophy, a hefty chunk of metal and glass that caught the light like a prism. And there was the announcer, shaking my hand, asking if I'd like to say anything to crowd. I looked back at Jack, sitting in his folding chair, grinning wider than I'd seen in years. Behind him, Sam was practically bouncing with excitement. Charlie had materialized from somewhere, giving me a thumbs up with those arthritic hands that had made this possible. My grandfather taught me that life is like a racetrack. I said into the microphone, my voice carrying across the quiet hall. You either drive it or you park it. But he also taught me that the real prize isn't the car or the trophy. It's sharing the journey with people who matter. The crowd erupted in genuine applause. Not polite recognition, but real appreciation for whatever was they'd heard in my voice, seen in my car, understood about this journey. As I made my way back through the crowd, trophy in hand, someone intercepted me, a well-dressed man in his 50s. Perfectly tailored suit, gold watch that probably cost more than my garage rent for a year. He introduced himself as Marcus Bennett, representing a classic car investment group based in New York. Bennett had been watching the competition all day. He explained. His group specialized in locating, restoring, and preserving significant American muscle cars. They were particularly interested in award-winning vehicles with documented histories and passionate stories behind them. He wanted to buy my Mustang. The figure he mentioned made my head spin. $5 million. He emphasized that this wasn't just about the car itself, but about the story, the documentation. The fact that winning first place at such a prestigious show significantly increased its value and historical importance. I stared at Bennett, trying to process numbers that didn't compute with my everyday reality. $5 million could solve every problem I had. Buy a house, set up college funds for Jack and Emma, create a foundation that would let me spend the rest of my life working on cars without worrying about rent or food. But standing there, looking at Jack, who had driven 4 hours to support me, holding a trophy that represented more than just technical excellence, something else occurred to me. Mr. Bennett, I said slowly, I appreciate your offer. I really do. And I'll accept it, but on one condition. Jack's eyebrows shot up. Bennett waited patiently. This car needs to inspire, I continued. Car shows, museums, educational programs. I want kids to see it, touch it, understand that you can still build something meaningful with your own hands. I want mechanics and enthusiasts to see that preservation and passion matter more than just money. Bennett smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his business formal demeanor. He understood, he said. His investment group wasn't interested in storing trophies in climate-controlled warehouses. They wanted to preserve automotive history in a way that educated and inspired future generations. We shook hands on the deal, pending paperwork and details. But the handshake was enough for me. In one afternoon, my life had shifted from barely surviving to financial security I'd never imagined. Jack approached as Bennett walked away, probably to begin making phone calls that would transfer more money than Rock Creek had seen in its entire history. Dad, he said, and his voice carried something I hadn't heard in years. Respect, pride, maybe even a bit of awe. You actually did it. The rest of the evening blurred into a celebration I hadn't anticipated. Strangers congratulating me. Photographers wanting pictures with the winning Mustang. Sam riding an adrenaline high that wouldn't quit. Through it all, Jack stayed close, not just tolerating the attention, but actually engaging with people who asked about the car and the restoration. When the show finally wound down and we were preparing to leave, Jack asked if he could ride with me in the Mustang for the trip home. It's a manual, I warned. Passenger seats, still just a passenger seat. I know, I just want to experience it. To understand what drove you all this time. The kid who'd been embarrassed by my grease-stained hands wanted to share the ride home in the car that consumed my life for a year. Who was I to deny him? We drove through Detroit as the sun set, the Mustang's engine rumbling through city streets that had witnessed the birth of American automotive industry. Jack sat quietly, listening to the engine's rhythm, watching the city lights begin to flicker on. "Dad," he said during a red light, "I'm sorry I've been such a jerk about all this." "You haven't been a jerk," I replied. "You've been 17. Big difference." Still, he glanced at me, then back through the windshield. "What you did today, the way you honored Grandpa while building something new, I finally get it. It wasn't just about fixing an old car. It was about not giving up on what matters." That's when I knew the real victory wasn't the trophy or the money. It was my son understanding, maybe for first time, that some things are worth fighting for even when everyone else thinks you're crazy. As we merged onto the highway heading home, Jack asked if I could put on some music. Classic rock, naturally. When Born to Run came through the restored speakers, we both smiled at the perfectly timed coincidence. "Think Grandpa's proud?" Jack asked. I thought about everything that had happened. The impossible chain of events that led me to O'Connor's barn, to Charlie at the swap meet, to this moment with my son beside me, selling a car that would let us build a future while honoring the past. "Kid," I said, "I think he's throwing confetti." The Mustang carried us down the interstate, its mission complete, taking us toward whatever came next. But for the first time in years, I wasn't worried about tomorrow. Some dreams, when you chase them hard enough, actually catch you. Time to build a new dream, I told Jack as Rock Creek's water tower appeared on the horizon. "You ready?" He settled deeper into the passenger seat, the restored leather creaking softly. "Let's do it, Dad. Let's build something together." 6 months after selling Grandpa's Mustang, I stood in front of the building that used to be Henderson's dry cleaners, watching 2 burly guys hang the new sign above the door. Grandpa's Garage blazed in neon blue letters that could be seen 3 blocks down Main Street, making Marge's Diner look like it was sulking in the shadows. The money from the Mustang had been like winning the lottery, except instead of buying boats or cars or lottery tickets, I'd done something Grandpa would have understood. I'd built something. The new shop hummed with the sound of rebuilt engines and the crackle of Johnny Cash on the radio. Fresh paint covered walls that hadn't seen attention since Nixon was president, and every tool in the place was either brand new or restored to mint condition. The concrete floor was so clean you could eat off it. Not that I recommend it, considering what we worked on. Rock Creek had never seen anything like it. For 40 years, folks had gotten their oil changed at Quick Lube on the highway or driven to Columbus for serious work. Now they lined up outside my shop like it was opening day at Disney World. Some came for the work, others just to see what all the fuss was about. Tom Ridley's finally lost it. They'd said when I started the renovations, using all that car show money to fix up Henderson's old place. But when the first customers saw what we could do, restoring vintage carburetors, rebuilding transmissions, making 40-year-old engines purr like house cats, their tune changed fast. Word spread through town like gossip at church potluck. Within 3 months, I had a waiting list. Within 4, I was hiring help. Sam was my first employee. The kid who tried to steal my tools was now my apprentice, soaking up knowledge about engines like a sponge. His foster family had moved back to town, and he spent every afternoon after school in the garage, learning everything from oil changes to rebuilding a small block Chevy. "Mr. Tom," he'd say while sorting through a box of used carburetors, "I think I found one that's not completely dead." The kid had inherited Grandpa's philosophy about parts. Never throw away anything that might be useful someday. Our shop became known as a place where impossible repairs became possible, where discontinued parts were somehow always in stock, where classic cars got the attention they deserved. I taught Sam the way Grandpa had taught me. Patience, respect for machinery, attention to every detail. Some nights, after closing, we'd work on our own projects. Usually something we'd rescued from a junkyard, something most mechanics would have scrapped. The best part wasn't the success or the money or even the recognition. It was a day in October when I looked up from rebuilding a '73 Mustang transmission and saw Jack walking to the front door, grease already under his fingernails. He'd quit his part-time job at the Cincinnati Mall and told Kate, He was moving back to Rock Creek. Told her he wanted to learn the family business. Even though car repair had never been family business until now. Kate hadn't been thrilled, but after watching him at the Detroit Auto Show, she'd seen something change in him. Dad, Jack had said that first day back, I want to learn everything. And learn he did. Jack had his mother's discipline and his grandfather's intuition with engines. Within weeks, he was handling customer work. Within months, he was rebuilding engines solo. Emma came back too, but in her own way. Still living with Kate during the week. She'd spend every weekend at the shop, sketching designs for custom signs, painting pinstripe work on restored cars, turning the waiting area into something that looked more like a car museum than a garage. You know what this place needs, Dad, she said one Saturday, surrounded by paint cans and half-finished murals. Stories. Every car has a story. We should tell them. So we started a wall of fame. Photos of every car we'd restored, with a little plaque telling its history. The 67 Camaro that survived 3 floods. The 70 Mustang Boss 3 02 Marine had shipped home from overseas. The 63 Corvette split window that had been in someone's barn since disco was popular. Emma designed them all, turning our garage into something between a repair shop and a celebration of American automotive history. Kate surprised me around Christmas. Not by coming to the shop, that would have been too much to hope for, but by sending a letter, actual paper, actual handwriting, delivered by Jack with a sheepish grin. In the letter, she thanked me for giving the kids something she hadn't been able to provide, belief in dreams, respect for hard work, understanding that some things are worth fighting for even when the world says you're crazy. She admitted she'd been wrong about the Mustang restoration, wrong about calling me a failure, wrong about thinking dreams and security couldn't coexist. The last line hit me hardest. Your grandfather would be proud. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. I read that letter 3 times, sitting in my office at the shop, before folding it carefully and putting it in the same drawer where I kept Grandpa's photograph and the Route 66 bumper sticker I'd carefully removed from the Mustang before the sale. March brought an unexpected surprise. Discovery Channel reached out about a reality show featuring classic car restorations. They'd heard about the Detroit win, about the new shop, about the guy who'd literally bet everything on a dream and won. We think you're exactly what American television needs. The producer told me during our first call. Real people doing real work, not manufactured drama. I agreed to a pilot episode, mostly because they offered to donate to the youth automotive training program I'd started. Every month, we'd bring in high school kids for hands-on workshops, teaching them skills that might lead to careers in a world increasingly going digital. Cameras think I'm Hollywood. I joke to customers during filming, but I'm just a guy who doesn't throw away rusty bolts. The show aired 3 months later. Suddenly, people from across the country were calling about restorations, bringing their classic cars to Rock Creek, Ohio. Main Street started filling up with car carriers delivering projects from California, Texas, Florida. Marge's diner hired extra staff. The motel at the edge of town started booking solid. Rock Creek was transforming, just like my Mustang had, from something forgotten and rusted to something vital and alive. But the real reward wasn't the fame, or the business, or the money. It was watching Jack teach Sam how to gap spark plugs the way Grandpa had taught me. It was seeing Emma design a logo for our youth program that incorporated elements from classic American muscle cars. It was the afternoon when the 3 of us worked together on a '69 Dodge Charger, each handling different aspect of the restoration, our skills complementing each other perfectly. The shop's first anniversary called for a celebration. We threw a car show in the parking lot, inviting everyone in town to showcase their rides, from pristine classics to daily drivers held together with Bondo and hope. Even Bob showed up in his beat-up pickup, still crunching those same off-brand chips after all these years. Miss Perkins arrived in her ancient Buick, which Sam had been maintaining for free since starting at the shop. She gave a speech about patience, persistence, and the importance of believing in your neighbor's dreams, even when those dreams look like rust buckets in drafty garages. Tom Ridley proved that sometimes the craziest ideas lead to the most beautiful outcomes, she concluded, raising her paper cup of punch. To Grandpa's garage. The crowd cheered, but what got me was seeing Jack and Emma standing together, both wearing Grandpa's Garage t-shirts that Emma had designed, both looking proud to be there. As the sun set on that anniversary celebration, I found myself standing where Henderson's dry cleaners used to be, looking at the glowing neon sign that had replaced a faded storefront. The parking lot was full of classic cars, their chrome catching the last rays of sunlight. Johnny Cash played from the shop speakers, and somewhere behind me, Sam was teaching a group of teenagers the proper way to torque lug nuts. Jack appeared at my side, wiping grease from his hands with a red shop rag. "Dad, you thinking about Grandpa?" I nodded, watching Emma show off her latest mural to a photographer from the local newspaper. "Grandpa used to say that a car carries your body, but dreams carry your soul," I told Jack. He'd say family is the road that takes you home. Jack put his arm around my shoulders, when had my son gotten taller than me, and smiled. Then we're exactly where we're supposed to be. A few weeks later, Jack and Emma surprised me with a gift, an exact replica of the toy Mustang Grandpa had given me when I was 10, except this one had been custom painted in Highland green with tiny GT500 stripes. For the man who taught us dreams aren't rust, Emma had written on the attached card, "And that persistence beats almost everything," Jack had added. I placed that toy Mustang on the counter at Grandpa's Garage, right next to the cash register, where every customer would see it. A reminder that sometimes the best journeys start with the smallest vehicles. 6 months later, on a warm Saturday morning in September, I was doing my favorite thing, working on a stubborn carburetor while classic rock played and sunlight streamed through the shop's big windows. Jack was installing a transmission a few bays over, cursing quietly as he fought with the alignment. Emma was outside, photographing a 71. Cuda we just finished for our portfolio. Sam stuck his head around the corner. "Mr. Tom, there's a lady here to see you." I looked up, expecting a customer, maybe someone with a breakdown on the highway. It was Kate. She stood in the doorway, looking uncertain, more like the woman I'd married than the one who'd left. She wasn't there to argue or complain or ask for anything. She'd come to see what I'd built, to understand finally what all the fuss had been about. I showed her around the shop, explaining the work, introducing her to Sam, pointing out Emma's artwork on the walls. Kate watched Jack confidently diagnose a complex transmission issue, solving problems I would have struggled with at his age. "They've learned so much," she said quietly. "We all have." Before she left, Kate stopped at the toy Mustang on the counter. "Was this Grandpa Jim's?" she asked. "His philosophy," I corrected. "The car is just a vehicle. The dream is what drives it." That evening, after we closed up shop and Sam had gone home, the three of us, Jack, Emma, and I, sat in the shop's waiting area, sharing pizza and watching the sun set through the big windows. The neon Grandpa's Garage sign flickered to life automatically, painting everything in soft blue light. "You know what I figured out?" Emma said, doodling on a shop rag with a Sharpie. "Mom was wrong about one thing. Dreams aren't stupid. They're just expensive in ways money can't measure." Jack raised his beer, the first one I'd ever officially shared with him, to expensive dreams and the stubborn people who chase them. I clinked my bottle against theirs, listening to the echo of our laughter mix with the residual hum of cooling engines and the distant sound of classic rock. Late that night, after Jack and Emma had gone home to their respective places, I stood outside the shop one more time, admiring the sign, breathing in the smell of fresh paint and motor oil, listening to the quiet sounds of small towns settling in for sleep. A new Mustang, not Grandpa's, but mine, sat in the parking spot closest to the door. Highland green, of course, but a modern interpretation, built for driving, not displaying, built for the road, not the showroom. I pulled out my phone and called Charlie, catching before his regular 9 p.m. bedtime. "The Detroit car is traveling the country like we planned," he told me. "Kids are lined up at every stop to see it, touch it, learn its story." "Good," I said, watching streetlights flicker to life down Main Street. "That's what it's for." "How's the new shop?" Charlie asked. "Busy. Really busy. Hard to believe it's only been a year. Grandpa Jim will be proud. Tom, you built something that matters." After hanging up, I took one last walk around the shop, checking locks, turning off lights, making sure everything was secure for the night. In the main bay, where we kept the restoration projects, a half-finished '69 Charger waited for tomorrow's attention. Sam had left a note on the windshield. Think I found the problem with the timing chain. The kid was going to be a hell of a mechanic. I climbed into my new Mustang and headed home, windows down, radio playing. As I passed Marge's diner, I could see the faded outline where Grandpa's garage reflected off her windows, our signs playing some kind of visual duet across Main Street. At the last red light before my street, I caught my reflection in the rear view mirror, a little grayer. Maybe a few more lines around the eyes, but the same guy who'd stood in that barn with a flashlight 18 months ago, chasing a dream that everyone said was impossible. The light turned green, and I drove toward home, humming along to Ring of Fire, thinking about tomorrow's work waiting at the shop, about Jack's progress with that stubborn transmission, about Emma's latest design for our second location in Columbus. Because that's the thing about dreams, especially the expensive ones. Once they start coming true, they don't stop. They just get bigger. Grandpa, I thought as I pulled into my driveway, we did it. We're home. And for the first time in years, home felt like exactly where I was supposed to be.